Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. You are watching Procrastinate with Books and this is me Yamini. Today we have a lengthy video coming up, so I would say grab your coffee and let's tune in further. At the start of this month, I did have a feeling that this whole month would be dedicated to a majority of fantasy reads because that was the mood I was in, gorging in from my initial ARC request and the kind of TBR that I was planning, and it holded true. So the first book that I read in this whole month was The Elf Dog and the Owlhead, and this is a middle grade series. In this story, there is a merger of the overall boundaries that are presented between the fantasy world and the real world. So there is this boy who's living in a natural world and he stumbles upon a dog who is so huge and amazing to his liking, and he gets attracted to the dog and he plans to adopt it also. But when he comes to know more about that dog, he fails to understand how this dog is even able to walk between the different boundaries where he would see a wall and the dog would just guide him further into the wall and disappear into the nothingness. And from there starts their overall adventure of exploring the huge mountains, the undertunnels, the strange dog, the elves, and also the owlhead creatures too. Next, I read The Basilisk Throne by Greg Case, which is another fantasy book that involves the sorcerers, dark magic, and also a war for the power of throne. Now, the book feels like a page turner because of its intriguing story that it narrates throughout the book, but I will give you a disclaimer that it does spend a lot of time building up those plot elements about the story and the parallel running story that is there in the book discussed in quite depth, I would say. So, there's a lot of time put out, not wasted exactly, but a lot of time has been spent just building up those plot areas, which is kind of paying off at the later part of the book because then you understand everything, why things are happening and all. But it gets a little slow paced for me in the first 50% of the book. But because a lot of elements in the book were based on the water attacks and the things that were carrying on in there, it actually reminded me a lot about the whole series of Pirates of Caribbean, and it has been compared to that movie and the book quite a bit. So overall, an okayish one-time read, I would say. Won't recommend to buy it and read it rather than a bargain and read it. Next, I picked up She Who Became the Sun for my book club read that I am engaged with on Instagram, and there we decided to pick this for fantasy read of the month. And I did try it. I do have some okayish recommendations from there because sometimes it turns out really well, sometimes not so much. And I would like to share my thoughts, a detailed version on this one. The plot of the book is set up in the Chinese Empire where empires are at war. There are revolutionaries going around, there are monks, there are low class people who are actually suffering with famine and other issues. There are bandits in here in the story. And the main protagonist of this book is also one of those low class people. And to escape that fate, she decides to act like a boy from a very young age and goes to a monastery and admits herself there as a monk and grows up to be a monk, and not many people know the secret behind her own gender. And now, with this, there is this whole empire that's at war, and she has to later on take sides and fight a war with them to help the empire win this war. And there's this role play that is going on a lot of this plot. Actually, in the later part, especially reminds me of the Poppy War series, and some people do say it's a watered down version of it. I don't exactly agree on that, but yeah, there were certain aspects, especially the name Alton, the overall Chinese empire, the war that's going on, and different strategies that they've been working on. And so the list goes on and on. And to conclude my opinions on this one, I don't hate it, I don't love it. There was just too much resemblance with the Poppy War, which I personally did not like, and that's why it was a 3-star rating for me. Other than that, the content was good, the story writing style was quite good, but then again, too many similarities. Now, after the experience of this particular book, I had to pick up something that would engulf me completely and get me infused into it, like if I was a part of that story. And that could only happen if it was an epic fantasy. But since I was already reading a war story, I did not want another war story. So I decided to pick a dark academia fantasy book. That brought me to A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed, who seems to be becoming my next favorite author as I'm loving to read anything and everything that she's writing recently. Now, before tuning in further, I would like to give a disclaimer that this book is not categorically just a dark academia. It has a lot of literature elements based into it. So only if you enjoy this whole combination of literature plus fantasy, I think this would be the book for you. But for me, that fit in perfectly well. And without even telling you what the book is about, I would just say it was a 5 out of 5 star read for me. The book is basically about a girl student based in a medieval times when people don't allow females to be a writer, authors, etc. However, they could be into an architectural lane, and so she decides to be an architect other than a literature student or even a writer herself. However, there's this author with whom she's absolutely obsessed and basically has learned the author's work word to word and can recite it. She's so obsessed with that author and his work. And she gets to know that the author's work is up for an investigation, and few of the literature students, one particularly, is doing certain investigation. And he offers her, since you are such a fan of this author, why don't you come and investigate things with me? And so she joins him on the journey, and there they discover the unperilous truths of the past times, what had happened few years back, and how this work actually came into existence, and the mystery behind this famous work. And as if this wasn't enough, the book also has a magical element or a ghostly gothic element, I would say. There is a fairy king, there are demons, there are haunting dreams, there are ghosts into this book that make it even more intriguing for me. Now, I'm really not sure if this is a pattern and if it happens with everyone else, but it does happen with me a lot. Whenever I have a 5 star read, my next read is usually a very bad one, and that's what happened this time too. Talking about my next book, Bell Hammers, which I actually picked because I saw the word Egypt in the description, and people who know me know that I'm so very badly obsessed with anything related to Egypt, Syria, Middle Eastern countries, and even Roman Empire in the long run. I don't exactly know if the problem was in the narrative or the narrator or the writing style, because this was a new style of writing for me that I explored. But sadly, it did not work out very well from me. I almost DNF'd it, but since this was an ARC, I really wanted to give it a try and dragged myself to the end, and I ended up hating it, obviously. So that's that. And now, to uplift my spirits, I obviously had to pick up another fantasy book, which is The Wings Once Cursed and Bound. The story actually has a secret society of supernatural beings who are trying to protect the magical object present in the normal world from human beings. And to make things more interesting, the book presents to you the whole setup in an urban fantasy format, which is very comparable to the modern world and technology that we are using currently. And that, infused with the fantasy elements, makes it all the more interesting. The variety of magical creatures this book had, from vampires, fairies, gorgons, and whatnot, I would say, actually astonished me. But on a sideline, there was this whole track of steamy romance scenes and stories that was going on, which is not really my kind of a read, which made it a little smutty for me. Might not be smutty for others, but I don't like such descriptive things, especially in the romance scenes. I certainly do enjoy the book a bit more if the author leaves certain parts of the whole story or the picture to the reader's imagination, which was not really the case in this particular one, and that is my only narrow escape for this one. My next read was certainly a little better and also emotional. It was All the Pretty Places by Joy Calloway, which is a historical fiction romance, I would say. The story is about a woman who is very daring according to the gilded times in which the story is set up and taking place, and she loves her nurseries to her heart and enjoys spending all her time building her hands in the mud, engrossing them, planting plants, and doing all those things rather than standing in front of the mirror and getting uplifted and everything. But now, when strange time comes and she has to look after the family, she is asked to make decisions and make sacrifices of herself. She's supposed to be marrying for stability, for income, for better future, and whatnot. The list goes on. But that list does not include marrying for love or even inheriting the family business that she loves so dearly. The book is actually heart wrenching, and the story, especially the romance part, is so giving in nature that it does resemble a medieval time, because that kind of love is hard to come by these days, and it's even hard to be seen or read across. These days, it's all so pretty fast and quick, but that story, that book, is so different from this time. A definite read for people who love historical fictions that are not based on a war zone. Up next on our list is another great fantasy book, which is The Bone Shard War, which is the third book in the trilogy of the Drowning Empire series. When I saw this on NetGalley, I was elated. I knew I had to get this one and read it as soon as possible. Just skip out the blurb for this one because then it would be the spoilers for the other two books. But talking about the overall elements and the world building in this whole series is magical, and the whole bone shard concept is very novel and new, I would say. The anticipation for this particular part of the series has been in making for a very long time, and I was extremely excited. Obviously, I've told you that. But my complaint with this particular part was the questionable decision making skills of the main protagonist. I mean, have you absolutely learned nothing from your past experiences in the other two books that we read? Why are you trusting the wrong people constantly and making wrong decisions? Even when I can see that it's wrong for you, even though I don't know the next plot twist that is coming up, why are you doing that? And because of that level of agitation being built up, I don't like this part, though I like the whole series, but not this particular part. Now, I knew another fantasy book won't be able to help me, or any other book for that matter, so I had to decide to calm myself down, and drawing is essentially the nature by which I tend to do so. So, I saw this on NetGalley and decided to pick this up. My next read was The Mindfulness in Drawing. Now, when I decided to pick this up, I thought it would be an illustrative, figurative drawing sessions kind of a book that would guide you through different steps to calm yourself down and be more mindful in what you're actually drawing. But it's not a descriptive book, sadly. It was a complete textual version of a book which basically took you through the different phases of calming yourself down and being more mindful from your body, from your mind, and from the hands with which you used to draw. That being said, it did have certain steps and prompts for you to exercise and implement in your real life so that you can execute those ideas that it was describing you in the book. I would have liked it more if this drawing book actually had certain drawings in it. My next read was If We Were Being Honest, and honestly, it was not one of my favorites for this month. It was a contemporary fiction book that I decided to pick up for a change of habit and the trend that I was seeing in my reading pattern. Just to give it a break, I decided to pick this up. The book starts off with a funeral that's going on currently, which is very different and interesting to read. And from there, it introduces you to the different members of Williamson's family. But rather than the whole story being streamlined into a single direction, this was more like a family tree branching out into different stories of each characters that is associated with the family. And that's what basically the story was about. There were a lot of elements that made this book a very highly audience specific book, which unfortunately I was not able to capture from the blurb. So I might as well put this out for you to pick and choose if this works or does not work for you. Number one, there were way too many characters in the book that were discussed in depth. For someone who actually reads a lot of fantasy books and is able to keep up with a lot of character names and their stories at the same time, it would be okay. But for someone who doesn't really necessarily want to branch out so much and just want a few characters, I don't think this would be the one for you. Point number two, a contemporary tale with no specific element to it. So, for people like me, I actually enjoy if a book, even if it's contemporary, it has a element of mystery to it or certain learning element dealing with certain issues, be it social, mental, or any specific thing. Because otherwise, why would you even read a contemporary book? It's just like watching a recording of a traffic light signal, things are going on casually, which happens daily. The same things are happening in the book as well. Why would I want to read something like that? I want certain elements to be presented into it. Otherwise, I would, for the very least, read a memoir, which actually gives me strength and certain learning abilities to learn from other people's experiences as well. So, that is the number two caution. Number three, it's LGBT friendly. So, for people who actually like me, enjoy this book. Actually, that was the reason why I kept going on into this book, was solely because it was LGBT friendly, and the parents were actually dealing out with teenagers who were coming out with their natural personalities and their choices in life, and how do we actually embrace them and not make them feel awkward. So that whole part of the tale was something that kept me going. Based on the facts that I presented to you, you can make a choice whether this book is meant for you or not meant for you. Now, to avoid getting into a reading slump, I decided to read some graphic novels on the way, and the first one that I picked up was Freya. Based out in Europe, this is a story of a young girl who was supposed to be the next chief of the clan after her father gives up the position or basically dies. But there is this whole politics going around, and she's been framed for the murder of her father, and now she suddenly has to flee that place where she has been living all her life. Pretty illustrations and great recommendations for teens age group. This has a beautiful atmospheric build up, and I'm sure anyone can read this in a very quick time because it's quite short. Next, I picked up All That Consume Us, which has basically consumed all my mind, body, and soul. It was a 5 out of 5 star rating, a dark academia book that I enjoyed thoroughly. The story is about a girl who has made it into a high level college and she can't believe her luck, and that's when she is being offered to join the Magniveri, which is the elite society of this college. The book is loaded with Latin spells, ghosts, spirits, body possession, and other witchcraft based elements, or I would say ghostly elements, that actually showcase you the madness behind this elite society and how basically all the students in this particular arena are madly driven by their passion. I feel that this would be a perfect companion if you want to read dark academia and something related to ghostly spirits and everything during Halloween. This would be the perfect book to add it to your list right now. Next, I wanted to read a cozy mystery series, and for that, I picked up Death by Chocolate Marshmallow Pie, which I thought actually would be exciting but turned out to be pretty average because it was mostly predictable. The story is around two girls who are working in a bakery because it's a cozy mystery part, and then there is a competitor just next door who is basically spreading false accusations around these people just to run down their bakery, and she goes over there to confront him and says this and that kind of things, and the next day he's found dead. So that is the kind of predictable thing I'm talking about in here. And obviously, one of the person who actually went there to yell at him is being convicted as one of the suspects in his murder. And that's where the whole things turn out, that you have to solve the case before the police actually does convict them of being a murder and save your friend's life. But that was not my biggest complaint. My bigger complaint with this book was the underrepresentation of marshmallow in the book, and the way they actually highlighted it, which was not really in a positive sense, just made me a bit agitated because I actually love marshmallow. And because I did not have good luck with contemporary or even cozy mystery for that matter, I decided to pick something that was more connected to the real situation, and that's where I decided to go for a non fiction book. Chernobyl is based around the actual theory and the actual disaster that happened back then in Russia, which was a nuclear disaster, and we have, I think, learned about it in during our school times. But this whole book actually gave a detailed aspect and vision of the whole theory and how things happened. The good part about this book is it did not just start off from the nuclear reaction part, it actually introduces you to the overall history of nuclear weapon development, how things actually happened, and what actually led to this disaster, which is covered in a lot of depth. I'm very picky when it comes to non-fiction books because I don't like the narrative of a non-fiction book in an essay kind of a format where they are basically just, writing an essay about a particular topic rather than a storytelling kind of a format. And that's where I get very picky. Fortunately for me, this was in a storytelling format, and that is why I was able to make it to the end without losing my brain cells. Overall, a decent book. If you are in mood to read a non-fiction, give this a try. Next, I picked up What Lies in the Wood, and solely because Bookstar made me do it. You can love this book, you can hate this book, but you just can't ignore it, and that's why I read it. Story is about three best friends who were going to the school, and one day when they were playing in the woods, they were severely attacked, and yet they lived to tell the tale. The criminal was identified based on the statements given by these three young girls and was sent to imprisonment, but not all truths have actually made it to the surface yet, and there is still a unsolved mystery behind the events that actually happened that day in the woods, and what all other secrets are also lying in that wood. So I actually jumped into this book without reading any kind of a blurb, and that worked pretty well for me. I think it may work for you as well. The book had plenty full of surprises held into it and also a handful of twists, I would say, that were secretly swept into the book. You might see a mixed kind of a reaction for this book because some people actually love the ending, some people don't love the ending, and that's where the whole rating contrast comes into the picture. And now, jumping off to my final read of this month, The Assassin's Thief, which is the first book in a trilogy of The Soul Thief, and it's a brand new world build up into the fantasy kingdom. An amalgamation of diverse characters such as fays, fairies, humans, queens, and even unnatural beings that are being possessed by godly powers made this an awesome read. Another important part that actually made this book a good read was because I consumed this in an audio format, and the narrative cast of this whole audiobook was actually great. I could easily identify all the characters from one another. Never at any point of time was I confused that who spoke these lines, what's going on, am I lost or something. It was great. Unfortunately, however, the pacing of this book was not so great. It was more like a sine wave progression. It was slow, then fast, then slow, then fast. And there were a lot of areas which I was basically fast forwarding and listening to a high speed. I'm really not sure if this book would give you the same effect if you actually read a ebook or a physical book. This is my review based on the audiobook. With that, my book friends, I have actually made it to the end of the video. We have covered up all the books that I read this month, and that's my wrap up for the April books. Thank you so much for waiting till the end and watching these videos patiently. I hope you have a wonderful vacation that allows you to pick up few of those books that you collected and you get time from your busy schedule and rest a bit while. I'll catch up with you in my next video. Until then, keep your coffee strong and your TBRs long. Goodbye.